Janet Yellen has been shaping U.S. economic policy for decades.
Yeah, she's really been a major figure in economics for such a long time.
She is actually the only person to have served as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, chair of the Federal Reserve, and U.S. Treasury Secretary.
You're right.
So let's dive into her perspectives on the economy, President Biden's economic legacy, and what might change under President-elect Trump.
Okay, sounds good.
So starting with the Biden administration, how does Yellen view the economic policies that have been enacted?
Well, she sees them as pretty successful overall, especially in terms of helping the country recover from the pandemic.
Right.
Those policies were really focused on mitigating the negative impacts of COVID and getting the economy back on track.
And it seems like the U.S. economy is doing pretty well right now, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What exactly is she pointing to as signs of strength?
One of the things she highlights is how much the U.S. economy has grown compared to other G7 nations. The U.S. is seeing stronger productivity growth, and the typical worker is actually better off than they were before the pandemic hit.
Wow, that's really good news.
And on top of that, inflation has been coming down, and it's getting close to the target level.
That is good news.
Yeah.
But I know she's also expressed concerns about fiscal sustainability and the U.S. budget deficit.
Yeah, that's right.
What's driving those concerns?
Well, even though there are a lot of positive aspects to the current economic situation, she's worried about the deficit, especially with interest rates being so high right now.
I see.
Those high interest rates make it more expensive for the government to service its debt.
So it puts more pressure on the budget.
Exactly.
So what does Yellen propose to address this deficit issue?
Basically, she thinks we need to find ways to reduce the deficit.
Okay.
She mentions how President Biden has already made some progress, reducing the deficit by $1 trillion over 10 years.
Okay.
And Biden also proposed a budget that aims to cut the deficit by another $3 trillion in the following decade.
So that sounds like a combination of spending cuts and maybe some revenue increases.
Yeah, potentially both.
Does she offer any other specific ideas for reducing the deficit?
One thing she suggests is letting parts of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act expire.
Oh, interesting.
That could help to keep fiscal policy on a more sustainable path.
But that might be a tough sell with the new administration coming in.
Right.
President-elect Trump seems to have a very different view on taxes.
Yeah, he's definitely signaled that he wants to go in a different direction.
And speaking of different directions, President-elect Trump has also talked a lot about implementing tariffs, particularly on goods from China.
Yeah, that's a big difference from Yellen's stance on trade.
Why is she so cautious about using tariffs?
Well, she's worried about the potential consequences, especially for American consumers.
Okay.
One of her biggest concerns is that broad tariffs could lead to price increases for a lot of goods.
So it would hit people right in their wallets
Yeah.
and potentially make inflation even worse.
Right.
Are there any other downsides she sees to this approach?
She also points out that tariffs could make things more expensive for businesses that rely on imported materials.
Which could hurt their ability to compete.
Exactly.
So she's worried that it could actually slow down economic growth and make it harder to bring inflation under control.
Yeah.
So it sounds like she sees broad tariffs as pretty risky.
Definitely.
Does that mean she's completely against tariffs in all situations?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
She does believe that there are times when they can be justified, like if you need to address unfair trade practices.
Okay, I understand.
But even then, she prefers a more targeted approach.
So what kinds of unfair trade practices is she talking about?
Well, she's been critical of some of China's practices, like developing overcapacity in certain industries and then dumping those goods on global markets.
Which can undercut U.S. industries.
Right.
Well,
She's also raised concerns about subsidies that foreign governments provide, especially in the semiconductor sector.
so it's about leveling the playing field.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
So she sees targeted tariffs as a way to address specific problems without causing widespread economic damage.
Exactly.
And she points to the Biden administration's targeted tariffs on things like clean energy goods and semiconductors from China as an example of this approach.
Right. Those were more focused on specific concerns.
It seems like that distinction between targeted and broad-based tariffs is really important to understanding her perspective.
It is, for sure.
Okay, so moving on from tariffs, are there any other potential policy changes under the incoming administration that she's expressed concerns about?
One of the things she's worried about is potential interference with the Federal Reserve.
What do you mean by interference?
Well, President-elect Trump has said that he thinks he should be able to advise the Fed.
Okay.
And he's even hinted that he might try to pressure the Fed chair to resign if he doesn't agree with their decisions.
Oh, wow.
Yellen is a very strong advocate for an independent and apolitical Federal Reserve.
Right.
She believes the Fed needs to be able to make decisions based on what's best for the economy without any political influence.
And why does she see that independence is so important?
She argues that countries with independent central banks tend to have better economic outcomes, particularly when it comes to inflation and overall performance.
Okay.
There's a lot of research that shows that central banks that can operate without political pressure are more effective at keeping prices stable, supporting job growth, and promoting economic growth.
So she sees letting the Fed operate freely as being in the best interest of the economy as a whole.
Exactly.
And she makes the point that throughout her long involvement with the Fed, she's never seen politics influencing their decision-making.
Right.
She believes that's essential for maintaining market confidence and ensuring that the Fed's actions are truly focused on what's best for the American people.
It sounds like this could be a big point of contention with President-elect Trump, though.
Yeah, his views seem to be pretty different.
Yeah, he seems to think he should have more say in what the Fed does.
And Yellen is pretty clear that she sees any attempts to influence or undermine the Fed's independence as potentially really harmful.
Yeah, she's worried that it could destabilize the economy and erode trust in the Fed.
And of course, she's had a conversation with our nominated successor, Scott Bessent.
Yeah, they talked about the transition.
Did she offer any advice for him as he steps into this role?
Well, they didn't get into specific policy discussions.
Okay.
But she did share some insights from her experience at the Treasury.
Like what?
She emphasized how talented the Treasury staff is, especially the civil servants.
Oh, interesting.
She talked about their analytical skills, their professionalism, their integrity, and how crucial they are to producing reliable analysis and policy recommendations.
So it sounds like she wanted to reassure him that he's inheriting a really strong team.
Yeah, definitely.
And she highlighted how important their work is for the smooth functioning of both the economy and the financial markets.
Yeah, the Treasury plays a huge role, both domestically and internationally.
So it's clear that she sees the Treasury as a vital part of maintaining economic stability and promoting American interests on the global stage.
Exactly. One of the things that's really interesting about Janet Yellen is how her views on trade have evolved over time.
Oh, how so?
Well, she used to have a pretty traditional view of free trade, kind of like the idea that if another country can make something cheaper than we can, we should just say thank you and buy it from them.
Yeah, that makes sense on the surface. It seems efficient, right?
Exactly. But she's come to recognize that it's not always that simple.
What changed her thinking?
Well, she saw how the influx of low-cost imports, especially from China after it joined the World Trade Organization, really hurt the U.S. manufacturing sector and cost a lot of American jobs.
I see.
She estimates that something like 2 million well-paying jobs were lost, and certain regions of the country were hit especially hard.
Yeah, that thank you note probably doesn't feel so good when you're in a community that's lost its main source of employment.
Exactly. And it really highlights how you can't just look at trade through the lens of economic efficiency. You also have to consider the social and distributional consequences.
So it's not just about whether the overall economy benefits, it's about who benefits and who loses out.
Right. And you have to make sure that those who are negatively affected are taken care of.
Otherwise, you end up with social and political unrest, which can actually undermine the economic stability that free trade is supposed to promote.
Exactly.
So it sounds like she's calling for a more nuanced approach to trade policy.
Definitely. She's also worried about the long-term implications of allowing foreign subsidies to undermine U.S. competitiveness in key industries.
Like semiconductors, for example.
Exactly. Semiconductors are essential for so many things these days, and she points out that if we allow other countries to dominate that industry through subsidies, it could hurt innovation and long-term growth across the whole economy.
So it's about more than just the immediate costs, it's about the future of the U.S. economy.
Right.
So she's not saying that we should abandon free trade altogether, but she's advocating for a more strategic approach.
Exactly. It's about being selective, identifying sectors that are critical to our national interest, and making sure that we maintain our strength in those areas, even if it means deviating from a purely free trade approach.
And this ties into the concept of friendship friendshoring that she's been talking about.
Right. Friendshoring is all about diversifying our supply chains away from China and strengthening partnerships with other trusted nations.
So it's about reducing our reliance on any one country while still reaping the benefits of global trade.
Exactly.
That diversification could create new opportunities for businesses and lead to more stable and resilient supply chains.
It's definitely a strategy with big implications.
And on top of that, she's a big believer in government investment in key sectors to drive economic growth and address societal challenges.
Yeah, she highlights how the Biden administration has really focused on enacting legislation to boost the U.S. economy, like bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act.
Those are all pretty major investments in infrastructure, clean energy, semiconductors, and other areas that are seen as crucial for future prosperity.
And she emphasizes that these investments are aimed at creating good-paying jobs, especially in regions that have historically been left behind.
It's about making sure that the benefits of economic growth are shared more widely.
Exactly. She notes that a lot of the private investment that's being stimulated by the Inflation Reduction Act is flowing into counties with below median income and education level.
That's really encouraging to hear.
It shows that government investment can be a powerful tool for driving inclusive growth and making sure that everyone has a chance to succeed.
So it's not just about growing the economy, it's about growing it in a way that benefits everyone.
Exactly.
It's a more active role for government than just being a regulator or a referee.
Right. It's about actively shaping economic development, promoting innovation, and creating a more just and equitable society.
It's an interesting perspective.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But even with her generally positive outlook on the U.S. economy, she does have some concerns, especially about fiscal sustainability.
Right. The deficit.
Even though the economy is performing well, she sees the large budget deficit as a potential vulnerability, especially with interest rates rising and making it much more expensive to service that debt.
So it's a ticking time bomb in a way.
It could be, yeah. A growing deficit can erode confidence in the economy and limit the government's ability to respond to future challenges.
So what does she propose to do about it?
She advocates for a pretty multifaceted approach.
Like what?
Well, she talks about spending cuts, revenue increases, and potentially letting some of those tax cuts expire that we talked about earlier.
So it's about finding a balance between making necessary investments and being fiscally responsible.
Exactly. It's a tough challenge, but it's one that we have to address.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of the Federal Reserve, which she's been very vocal about.
Yeah, she's a staunch advocate for the Fed's independence. She argues that it's absolutely essential for maintaining economic stability and market confidence.
And she's really opposed to any attempts to politicize the Fed or interfere with its decision-making process.
Absolutely. She believes that an independent central bank, free from political pressure, is much better equipped to make sound monetary policy decisions based on what's best for the economy.
And he points to the research showing that countries with independent central banks tend to have lower and more stable inflation, as well as stronger economic performance overall.
Right. The evidence is pretty clear on that.
So she sees allowing elected officials to dictate monetary policy as a really dangerous idea.
Yeah, it could lead to decisions that are driven by short-term political considerations rather than what's best for the economy in the long run.
So there's a tension there between the role of elected officials and the need for expertise and independence in certain areas of policymaking. And for Yellen, the independence of the Fed is non-negotiable.
Yeah, she sees it as absolutely crucial for the long-term health of the economy.
And she's made it clear that she thinks any attempts to influence the Fed's decision-making process could undermine market confidence and ultimately harm the economy.
Right, which puts her at odds with President-elect Trump, who has expressed a desire to have more control over what the Fed does.
He's even suggested that he should have the ability to advise the Fed and has hinted at pressuring the Fed chair to resign. What's Yellen's take on those ideas?
Well, she sees those kinds of statements as a really big red flag.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like there could be some clashes ahead.
For sure. She's made it very clear that she thinks any attempts to exert that kind of political control over the Fed would be incredibly damaging.
So this is definitely something to watch closely as the new administration takes office.
Yeah, the stakes are high. The Fed needs to be able to make decisions that are in the best interests of the economy, not based on political whims.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, let's go back to that conversation Yellen had with her successor, Scott Bessent.
Oh yeah, with Scott Bessent. doesn't.
She shared some thoughts with him based on her experience leading the Treasury.
Right. She emphasized the breadth of the Treasury's work.
What does she mean by that?
Well, she pointed out that it's not just about economic policy.
Right.
The Treasury also deals with things like tax policy, sanctions, international alliances.
Wow, so it's a really wide-ranging role.
It is, yeah.
And she talked about the importance of the Treasury's role in maintaining stability of the financial markets.
Right, especially the Treasury market, which is really the foundation of the whole global financial system.
It's a huge responsibility.
It is. And she also spent some time talking about the people who work at the Treasury.
Oh, the staff.
Yeah, especially the civil servants. She really emphasized their dedication, their expertise, and their integrity.
She seems to have a lot of respect for them.
She does. She told Besson how important they are to the Treasury's success and how much she relied on them during her time there.
It sounds like she was trying to reassure him that he'll have a really strong team to work with.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
So stepping back, it's clear that Janet Yellen has a really deep understanding of the economy, both from a theoretical and a practical perspective.
Definitely. And she doesn't shy away from tough issues.
Right. Whether it's income inequality, climate change, or the national debt, she's willing to address those challenges head on.
And she brings a lot of experience to the table.
Absolutely. And she's not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom or to speak her mind, even when it might be unpopular.
That's true. She's definitely her own person.
So as we've seen in this deep dive, she's a strong advocate for policies that promote both economic growth and social justice.
Right. It's not just about making the pie bigger. It's about making sure that everyone gets a fair slice.
Exactly. And she's a firm believer in the importance of government playing an active role in shaping the economy.
But at the same time, she's also a pragmatist who understands the limits of government intervention.
And she's always mindful of the need to maintain fiscal responsibility.
She is. So while she sees a lot of opportunities for progress, she's also realistic about the challenges we face.
Well, it's been fascinating to explore her insights on these critical economic issues.
It has, yeah. She's a really thoughtful and engaging speaker.
And her perspective is incredibly valuable as we navigate these complex times.
I agree.
Goodbye and see you in the next video.